They just can't let this game go. Isn't that right, Kitty? Look, I empathize. I've been having a hard time putting down Black Myth Wukong. So when I see these journalists having a hard time letting it go, I get it. But, man, for all intents and purposes, after Black Myth Wukong was a wake-up call, I planned on just walking away from the discussion. I already said my piece. There really isn't a whole lot else to be said. I did my review, I pushed back on some things that the media was saying, but little did I know that the worst article that I've ever read in my life would be posted the day after. They've gotten to the point now where instead of just wanting to walk away, they need to make sense of this. And the only way to be able to do that is through conspiracy theories. Oh yeah, because once you become so disconnected from reality, the only way to make sense of it is by connecting the dots. In an article from The Inverse written by Shannon Liao, former Washington Post staff writer and culture reporter for CNN, she titles her article, Black Myth Wukong Isn't Even Good, but That Won't Stop Chinese Nationalists and Anti-Woke Sales. Oh boy. Shannon writes, in Black Myth Wukong, after I crushed the nasty snake boss, the game's heroic monkey protagonist triumphantly marched through the temple gates only to find another boss. I warily trounced the bear boss too, but what I really wanted was new characters to chat with, or a nice spot to lay my head. Perhaps in the game's next chapter? No shot. I walked forward only to enter another area full of aggressive beasts and visually appealing swaths of barren wasteland. After 10 years of game development, Chinese developer Game Science's Black Myth Wukong has had a viral reception, a 10-cent minority investment, and an unbelievable success on Steam. But while sinking a dozen hours into Black Myth Wukong, I couldn't help but think of how many gamers would have complained if Elden Ring or Diablo 4 contained such sparse amounts of content. Wukong's world feels empty and devoid of life. If that sounds familiar, I'm echoing what players said about Starfield last year, another 60-hour RPG saga, which ironically had loads of side quests and was in fact much livelier than the internet might have you believe. Judged by its own merit, cultural and political context aside, Black Myth Wukong isn't a particularly inventive game, even if the boss fights are very fun. The environment feels stale and small when you realize that most doors stay glued shut and walls aren't climbable. When I ran through the outer limits of each biome, I found a deserted terrain with nothing to do. In between big bosses, the game doesn't offer you the chance to reflect, rest, and enjoy the scenery. Instead, it merely pushes you to the next stage. The assets for the land repeat. It's almost as if you've been trudging through a maze. I haven't come across any side content in the 12 hours I've explored the game. And for non-Chinese speakers, a common refrain is that the narrative and rough translation are confusing. I recommend turning on Chinese dialogue for more flavor and ambiance. But even then, it would sound like one guy is acting out all the voices. Oh man, where do I start with this? 12 hours. You know, one of the things that I've come to realize after reading a lot of these negative articles and reviews around Black Myth Wukong is that the vast majority of the personal experience makes it sound like they didn't even play the game in the first place. 90% of what they talk about is in the first chapter and nothing beyond that. And nor do they ever recognize the importance of story pacing when you're adapting Journey to the West. I cannot believe that they had the gall to write, the game doesn't offer you any chance to reflect, rest, and enjoy the scenery when the game quite literally has a meditation mechanic for that purpose specifically, but you didn't find that because you didn't play the game. Of course you would say that there's no new characters or side quests because you didn't find them, because you didn't look for them. Hell, in the middle of Chapter 3, you meet Zhu Bajie, the short, foul-mouthed boar that essentially tags along with you throughout your journey, constantly chatting, breathing humor into the narrative, and fleshing out the story, but you wouldn't know that because you never got to that point in the game. 12 hours, that's it. That's all they could give the game, and to be honest with you, if you look around at a lot of these different articles and even some of the reviews that are out there, most of the criticisms are coming from the first chapter, because that's all they could give the game. And the reason why is because these folks have a predisposition to not like this game, to not like the studio that made it, to not like the people that bought it, or even the country that it came from. They are sitting down already mad before they press play. And when you do that, well, you're not sitting down to play the game. You're sitting down to criticize it, to find things that you can be critical of, make a scathing review and then use that to bolster whatever your position is or your argument is against the game. That's how you come to the conclusion of, well, the game's not even good. It must be some type of dark secret as to why this game is so successful. That's how it works. And I think the other thing that you can see as well, and this is something that I see a lot of journalists, media commonly use this as well, where they'll put a negative line of discourse within the dialogue, even though it has nothing to do with it. It has nothing to do with the game or anything else. It's just in there to try to elicit some type of emotional response from the reader. And in the case of this, it's Black Myth Wukong had a viral reception, a 10-cent minority investment, and an unbelievable success on Steam. The reason why they say that is because they know that gamers don't necessarily have the fondest of attitudes towards Tencent. But what does it have to do with this discussion? And even more so, the 10-cent investment is 5%, by the way. Pretty common, as Tencent has about 5% in just every single company that's out there in the first place. But beyond that, this happened before the game even came out, so it has nothing to do with the game's success or anything pertaining to this discussion at all. It's just there to hopefully cast a little shadow of doubt, to do their best to diminish the success of this game in any way they possibly can. And if you were going to throw all of your credibility out the window, well, I mean, you did it by saying you only played it for 12 hours, but beyond that, when you say that players would be upset if Diablo 4 had released with such sparse amount of content. So, did you not work last year? Or this year? Diablo 4, since its release, has been trying to repair their reputation and bring players back to their game because it released with sparse amounts of content. It was obvious that past the story, they really didn't think a whole lot about Diablo 4 as a live service game, even though that's how it was being pitched. And to take it a step further, you invoke the name of Starfield, saying that it's much more livelier than the internet would like you to believe, leading me to know just how unhinged this is about to get. Shannon continues with, if Black Myth Wukong isn't as good as reviewers say, it's currently got an 81% on Metacritic, while Steam users have given it a 10 out of 10, then what's behind the title's astronomical success? Months before the game's launch, it had already drummed up an online furor that would eventually translate into Steam sales. And some self-proclaimed gamergaters even suspect it's part Chinese nationalism and part hype driven by the side of the internet that hates diversity and inclusion. This unholy combination may have inadvertently revealed a new path to success for edgy but ultimately mediocre video games. Last year, IGN published a report about the studio being plagued by claims of sexism, a piece that was critiqued by online users, which said that the evidence of sexism was merely vulgarity. The evidence cited included social media posts that likened the game development to birthing a child and the creator's excitement to sporting an erection. Inverse confirmed the translations independently. The logo for Game Science was also noted by the Chinese content creators for its resemblance to sperm. Oh my God. The reality is that IGN's report likely did not dissuade Chinese gamers from supporting Black Myth very much, as it described an internet culture many are familiar and comfortable with. In fact, controversy may have bolstered the sales by raising awareness of the game. Once upon a time, coming forward with cultural complaints about a piece of media might have facilitated healthy discussions and smarter consumption a few years ago. But in today's climate, it's more likely to trigger angry factions online and fuel sales of an otherwise ordinary product. It's possible a similar phenomenon happened with PlayStation's Stellar Blade, where a series of articles about the misogyny and objectification contained in the game ultimately worked to drive engagement. Wow. I want you all to take notice that they write Inverse confirmed the translations independently, but don't provide the translations to back their claim. I didn't talk about this in my last video, and I should have, but what these writers are likely doing is a flat translation and not an interpretation. When translating or transferring any language to another language, there are tons of examples of literal translations that don't mean anything close to their actual meaning and it varies even further by region. In Spanish, as an example, you can hear somebody say la cague, which directly translates to I shit. In another region, it's me cago en la leche, which directly translates to I shit in the milk. However, both of these are to be interpreted as I messed up or damn it. Imagine fabricating your entire outrage because you used auto-translate on some tweets rather than discussing the translations with a native speaker. Furthermore, all of these people that are complaining about a lack of diversity in Black Myth Wukong or alleged sexism from game science never define what the inclusivity is supposed to look like or how it affects the game, because it's just a blanket response of hate. It's the ultimate Uno reverse card that ends the conversation and requires no further response. They claim to have cultural concerns, however, when representing a revered and beloved story as Journey to the West, shouldn't the expectation be that it's adapted from the culture that made it and not turned into a social political vehicle for your personal values? Black Myth Wukong isn't a modern retelling, it's an adaptation. This is not Oh Brother Where Art Thou's version of the Odyssey, though that was really good. Terminally online, that's what this is. Seeing the world through the lens of Twitter. Imagine attributing the entire success of Black Myth Wukong to Chinese nationalists and the anti-woke. If those crowds showed up in these kind of numbers, they were that vast and so ready to support a game like this, up to, I think the game's almost at 20 million units sold a couple weeks after the game's release, or a little over a week after the game's release, every single AAA publisher and studio would be shoveling out games like Black Myth Wukong every single day, because you'd be guaranteed money. They'd be bathing in it. But that's not what happens, because that's not how the market reacts. People, consumers in general, do not buy based on social politics. Social political discourse is a microcosm of internet culture, more or less, that's perpetuated by the media and politicians to divide the people and maintain their relevance. It has nothing to do with why we buy games. You know, since my last video, Black Myth Wukong was a wake-up call, I had an outpouring of people so happy that I made that video, because they didn't really like how the media was portraying Black Myth Wukong, but also at the exact same time because the game just means a lot to them. That's it. A lot of folks that grew up watching Wukong television shows, or had their parents and grandparents that would read them stories from Journey to the West. Or just a bunch of Western gamers that are sick and tired of being tossed into these kind of groups like this writer is right now. Black Myth Wukong is just a fun game that has a fun story that was fairly priced and people like it. That's it. Shannon concludes her article with, at the same time, Chinese gamers have really needed a win. Considering how China banned consoles for 15 years, the country doesn't have the most robust game development scene. In a regulatory environment that's been harsh on gaming addiction and ruthless with approving new titles, as game science developers themselves have noted in a blog post cited by IGN, few blockbuster releases like Black Myth have made it through a decade of development to compete with the likes of Ragnarok. In many ways, Black Myth feels like a love letter back to Chinese culture and history. Journey to the West is one of the first Chinese novels I ever read, and it's considered one of the 4 great literary classics. Some of the in-game temples are based on real-life locations. All of these elements combine for a recipe for instant success, but without the rabid fan base of Chinese nationalists and gamergaters at the ready, I'm not sure anybody would be talking about Black Myth Wukong in 2024. We've been fed to the gills with great games that challenge our expectations, make us fall in love with the characters, and obsessively draw fan art and write odes to their narrative. A retelling of a 432-year-old tale with pretty trees and Ragnarok-style combat doesn't entirely hit the spot. So I recently read this article from Forbes that was titled The Woke War in Gaming, and it's a really interesting conversation because it brings up people's perception on why they believe certain games fail or succeed. And Black Myth Wukong was actually in that list of games that they were talking about. And what they talk about is how the controversies never factored into the purchasing decision for the folks that were over in China. But what they lose track of, and what I don't think they realize is that that's true across the board. Nobody's paying attention to these kind of things, not unless it's something that's trying to beat them over the head. Not unless it's something where they see a game like Dustborn and they can tell right from the get-go, this is wholly uninteresting, contrived, and none of the characters or gameplay looks interesting whatsoever. And that really is where it all starts. Is this a game that I'm going to like? Is this a game that is for me? Is this a game that is a genre that I play or something like that? Does it cost too much money? Do I have enough time to even play it in the first place? There's a lot of different factors that we look at far before we would ever get to social political ideologies and controversies. We could care less about those kind of things. If that was the case, there would be next to nothing that we would be buying today, because we just don't think about those kind of things when we're looking to buy and spend our money. It's sad to see how far journalism has fallen. And I want to make this clear. I talk about these articles not because I'm trying to sit here and roast them. Don't get me wrong. It's definitely fun to do that. But it's also because I view this the same way as I do my wake-up call videos. It's a course correction. It's me trying to have a discussion and point out logical fallacies to say, please stop doing this and go do something that's worthwhile in the first place. I still see a lot of value in written media. I still see a lot of value in a lot of different types of media and journalism. But at the end of the day, when you're getting this far away from why games are selling, why games do well, what actually matters to the players, to the readers, can you really be surprised that your industry is shrinking faster than... I don't even know. I don't even have anything. There's nothing faster. There's nothing faster. Anyway, Black Myth Wukong is just a great game. The Chinese nationalists didn't show up to support it. The Chinese players did. Because it was a game about a story that they love, with great-looking graphics, awesome-looking combat, and sold at a fair price. The alt-right or the anti-woke didn't show up in droves. Players did. Players bought it because it looked cool, because it was an interesting story from a region that we normally don't see games from, with themes that we normally don't see in games, with interesting combat and beautiful looking graphics, and it was sold at a fair price. Doesn't really have anything to do with anything else. We don't care about your controversies. That's it. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I didn't think I was going to be making another one about Black Myth Wukong this quickly, but here I am. Anyway, I got other writing and other videos to get back to. I got more Black Myth Wukong to play, as well as some Core Keepers. I've been having a lot of fun with that one as well. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for all the support in the last few videos. If you guys have been enjoying the content, subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment down below, like the video, share it with your friends. Follow me on Twitch if you want to see me talk about video game news and play games live. Outside of that, my friends, stay cool, stay righteous, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Peace.
Family, 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 family.